Bonjour, I'm Anamika Spots, and I'm from Cowichan Valley School District 79, and welcome to Build Your Own Inquiry Units workshop. I acknowledge that for thousands of years, the Quetzin, Malahat, Tabasset, Halalt, Penelakut, Chemainus, and Layakson people have walked gently on the unceded territories where I now exist, and I'm grateful for the warm hospitality and my interwoven past with the Anishinaabe people. Miigwech. A mind that is stretched by a new experience can never go back to its old dimensions. Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. I think this is such an important quote as we talk about inquiry learning. So this slide is, they are icons that are created to represent Kath Murdoch's core principles guiding the inquiry teacher's practice. And anytime in this presentation that you see writing or that's underlined or hyperlink, that's a link to a document or to a website. So you could click on that to see the full document. But Kath Murdoch's core principles guiding the inquiry teacher's practice includes ownership, interest, reflection, purpose, prior learning, transfer, collaboration, resilience, time, feedback, environment, openness, and joy. And this is taken from The Power of Inquiry by Kath Murdoch. And again, if you click on that link, there's more descriptions of each of those different core principles. So as we dive into inquiry units, we're going to be talking about some important components. So those important components are the BC curriculum as a whole, which include big ideas, content, curricular competencies, core competencies, and then also important components of inquiry units include inquiry questions, first people principles of learning, reflections, assessments, differentiation, rubrics, and unit plans. Again, these are all underlined, so if you click on them, they'll bring you to that certain page in the presentation, but we're going to dive into that now. So our units are going to be based on the BC curriculum. So that we have a understand, know, and do concept model. And that includes the big ideas, content, and curricular competencies. Then we have the core competencies, the umbrella, that model. And the core competencies include communication, critical and creative thinking, positive personal and cultural identity, personal awareness and responsibility, and social responsibility. So there's three different types of inquiry questions. There's factual, conceptual, and debatable questions. Factual are the what questions, and they are content-based, knowledge fact-based. The conceptual questions are the how questions, and they enable exploration of big ideas, and they connect facts and topics. Debatable questions are the should questions, and they promote discussion. So one example for a factual question, what is Sir A. Macdonald known for? Conceptual question, how did Sir A. Macdonald affect the First Nations people in Canada through his policies? And an example of a debatable question, should Sir A. Macdonald be celebrated as a famous Canadian? How to Make Your Questions Essential by Grant Higgins. They stimulate ongoing thinking and inquiry. They're arguable with multiple plausible answers. They raise further questions. They spark discussion and debate. They demand evidence and reasoning because varying answers exist. They point to big ideas and pressing issues. They fruitfully recur throughout the unit or year. The answer proposed are tentative and may change in light of new experiences and deepening understanding. So to create quality questions, you might want to consider starting your questions with some sentence stems. So here are some good sentence stems that you could start with. To what extent? What's the value of? When should or shouldn't we? In what context? And how important was? And any of these sentence stems really encourage us to create questions that don't come up with just a yes or no answer. So there's such a thing as good research questions and bad research questions. So good research questions are interesting, especially to the person that's doing the research. Is the scope of information reasonable? You should ask yourself. Easily and fully researchable, debatable, not too broad but sufficiently narrow, clear, concise, and complex. You don't already know the answer to your question, and you can't answer your question with a simple yes or no. So as we're creating our unit plans, it's important that we are integrating First People's principles of learning. The posters here with the different aspects of it. The hyperlink brings you to the first People's Classroom Resources, which has lots of great resources on it, as well as SetBC on the right here has a great collection of videos and audio clips, learning modules that highlight First People's principles of learning and inquiry. So as you're developing units, inquiry units, and also going through inquiry units, you want to make sure that you're setting aside time for both you and your students to reflect. So on the left here, there's a link to a BC curriculum webpage, which is developing and supporting K through 12 student reflection and self-assessment of core competencies, which is a good resource. And also on the right-hand side here are an example of what a core competency reflection could look like. So of course, there's one for personal and social, there's one for thinking, and there's one for communicating. And on this version, there's lots of different versions out there, but on this version, students are asked to choose a question to answer. There's a spot for them to write it in a sentence, and there's also a spot for them to draw how that core competency is being reflected in their learning. Another great reflection tool is a feedback feed-forward chart, which here's an example of one. So Kath Murdoch has a book called 40 Frameworks for Reflective Thinking, and these are 3 examples of options of reflective thinking inside her book. There is a link at the top there to access these, and then the link on the bottom right is a link to purchase her book on her website. This slide provides 3 extra resources for reflection. The first one on the left there is a link to the Project Zero's Thinking Routine Toolbox, which has lots of great resources. The middle link is to Models of Excellence web page, which is a great resource as well for using student work in order to give feedback. And the last link is to a website for resources and downloads to facilitate inquiry-based learning. So this slide focuses on assessment for learning, and assessment for learning is research-based principles of assessment for learning to guide classroom practice. And that includes, it's part of effective planning. It focuses on how students learn. It's central to classroom practice. It's a key professional skill. It's sensitive and constructive. It fosters motivation. It promotes understanding of goals and criteria. It helps learners know how to improve. It develops the capacity for self-assessment, and it recognizes all educational achievement. And so assessment for learning is meeting students where they're at and constantly reviewing and assessing and reflecting throughout learning to see if where you're at is appropriate for that student and where you should go from there. A big focus in inquiry learning is that assessment can be anything. So first, formative assessment options can be so many different options. Exit slips, KWL charts, Venn diagrams, discussions, comics, Kahoots, top 10 lists, drawing a picture, debates, four corners game, and that's just a few examples. Now to summative assessment options, again, tons of different choices. Demonstrations, making a movie, making books, poems, songs, raps, jingles, graphs, diaries, creating your own board game. Again, those are just a few examples. I wanted to highlight GRASPS, which stands for Goals, Rule, Audience, Situation, Product Performance, and Standards. And that hyperlink will bring you to the package of different forms to create a GRAS assignment. But GRAS is a way to develop performance tasks in order for students to show their ability, to integrate the use of knowledge and demonstrate how they can utilize skills in real world situations using the GRAS model. And this is just this first planning sheet where you brainstorm what you're going to give for a goal to your students, what role they're going to be in, who their audience is going to be, the situation that they're put into, and then what they're going to create in order to show what they've learned. So these are 2 sheets that are included in the package. The first one on the left are the possible student roles and audiences. So there's lots to choose from. They could be a researcher, a geologist, an astronaut, an author. And then on the right-hand side, there are possible products and performances that your students could be asked to create. It's broken into written, oral, and visual. And so it could be anything from a lab report or a letter, a dramatic reading, debate, to a banner, book, or cover, CD cover, advertisement. So this is a GRASS summative assessment project frame that I created as an example for a grade 5 social studies class. You'll notice that the curricular competencies, content covered, and the core competencies are included at the top. And then the directions for the student are what follows. So you're giving them a goal, and then you're also telling them a situation and what product that they have to create. So you need to convince the BC Forest Discovery Centre's Board of Directors that it is both beneficial and important for the BC Forest Discovery Centre to include local First Nations influences. And the students are told they're a local historian in the Cowichan Valley, and they're presenting to the BC Forest Discovery Centre Board of Directors. It's then followed with a description of the pamphlet they have to create, and then also a criteria checklist. So, and then here is an example of a pamphlet that a student could have created. So here's an example, both the front and the back, and you'll notice that all the different criteria listed before are included here. So differentiation, when you are doing an inquiry unit or when you're doing a unit or teaching at all, we all know is really important. So here's one example of a document that might be a really helpful resource while you're keeping track of your students' differentiation needs. So as you can see, this is an Excel file. There's a spot for you to enter your students' names alongside, along with the grade. And then they're broken up into general accommodations, literacy, reading, writing accommodations, numeracy, and environment. So you could put a little note in there or just a little check mark. So maybe you need to limit the text, or perhaps you need to have audiobooks for some of your students. Or maybe you need to make sure that some of your students are seated in certain spots around the room. So we're going to jump into the benefits of rubrics. So rubrics make the learning target more clear, both for the teacher and also for students. Rubrics make the assessment process far more accurate and fair. So you're basing your assessment off of the same criteria for every single student. Rubrics guide instructional design and delivery. Rubrics provide students with a tool for self-assessment and peer feedback. And rubrics have the potential to advance the learning of students of color, first-generation students, and those from non-traditional settings, where we sometimes may assume that we all are on the same level of understanding of what the project should look like. But if we don't explicitly provide those criteria, then we can't expect everybody to know what level of product that they need to come out with. On this slide, there's an example of a single point rubric. So on the left-hand side is a spot for students to fill in areas for improvement or for the teacher to fill it in. In the middle, there's the criteria is listed. And on the right-hand side is the evidence of exceeding standards. So the spots where the student went above and beyond. The benefits of single point rubrics are that they reflect both strengths and weaknesses in student work. It doesn't place boundaries on student performance. Students don't compare themselves or compete with one another. Takes student attention off the grade, creates more flexibility without sacrificing clarity, and it's simple and far less time consuming. Responsible student self-assessment with single point rubrics. So here's another example of a single point rubric. The top has a checklist for students to fill out, and in the bottom is a single point rubric with the performance criteria listed. On the left, there's a spot for the student to fill out how they will revise to better meet the criteria. Then it's followed by how I know I met the criteria, and then the far right is how I went beyond the criteria. Here's an example of a standards rubric, and this rubric was created for the GRASS summative assessment project that was mentioned before. So at the top are the 4 different levels that I created, and it goes along with the BC report card: emerging, developing, proficient, and extending. And it's suggested that you include 3 to 6 different levels. And then on the left-hand side is the criteria. And again, it's recommended that you include 3 to 6. And so for this project, students were graded on content, organization and conventions, ideas, and graphics, and attractiveness. So now that we've talked about inquiry units, we're going to bring it all together. by talking about a unit planner and how to organize all those different things that are important for an inquiry unit and how to organize that and how to put it all together. So this is a unit planner that I created in order to organize everything that we need to include for a unit plan. So there's a curriculum overview and a spot for your subject. There's a spot for your big idea, what you're starting with, your unit title, the content that you're going to be including, the curricular competencies, a spot to list the assessments that you're going to be including, so projects, rubrics, standards, instructions, and checklists, then which inquiry questions are going to drive the unit, a spot for First People's Principles of Learning, and then the core competencies. So communication core competencies, thinking core competencies, personal and social core competencies. And then at the very bottom, a spot for differentiation. So this is the second page of the unit planner, and this is to keep track of the core competencies that you are addressing in your units. So the idea is that you highlight one as you include it, and if you're including it more than once, then you'll start to tally how many times that you've used it, and it's just a good way to keep track of which core competencies you're spending a lot of time on and which ones you need to spend more time on. So this is the third and final page of the unit planner. And so on the left-hand side is a spot to keep track of the First People's Principles of Learning and how many times you're integrating each of those things. So you can see which ones you've included and which ones you need to spend more time on. Then on the right-hand side is a spot for you to address how you will specifically be including First People's Principles of Learning. And on the bottom is a reflection. So what went well in your unit plans, what things do you want to change or do you want to remember for next time? So I just wanted to say, Miigwech, thank you so much for visiting my inquiry unit workshop today and joining me. And please feel free to contact me and Amika Spots with any questions that you might have. Miigwech.